Wolves at the Door, a scary Halloween story for adventurous souls. Chapter 1. Halloween Night in Ash Hollow. The town of Ash Hollow was the kind of place where time seemed to stand still. Nestled in the woods and cut off from the rush of the modern world, it had a quaint, almost old-fashioned charm. Autumn brought a kind of magic to the town, with the streets lined in bright orange leaves and the faint scent of pumpkin spice drifting from windows. Halloween was the highlight of the year in Ash Hollow. Each October, the quiet streets would come alive with the excited chatter of children dressed in costumes, going door to door for candy. Every house was decorated with glowing jack-o'-lanterns, cobwebs, and ghosts hanging from trees. But there was one house on Maple Street that was always the main attraction. The old creaky house at the end of the street had been vacant for years, or so everyone thought. It was the kind of place you'd expect to be haunted. Overgrown garden, shutters barely hanging on, and an eerie stillness to it, even on the brightest of days. But that year something had changed. Lights flickered on behind the dusty windows, and rumors spread quickly among the town's kids that a new family had moved in. "They say they give out the best treats," whispered Jack as he adjusted his skeleton mask. He was dressed as a skeleton knight, complete with a cardboard sword. His friends, Amy, Ethan, Sarah, and Lily, walked beside him, their pillowcases already half filled with candy from other houses. "I don't know," said Sarah, her face scrunched in concern beneath her witch's hat. "That house has always been creepy. My brother says it's haunted." "Your brother says everything is haunted," Amy teased, tugging on her fairy wings. "Come on, it's Halloween. What's the worst that could happen?" "The worst is that we waste time and don't get more candy," Ethan chimed in, shaking his nearly full bag of sweets. He was dressed as a pirate, the fake parrot on his shoulder looking a little worse for wear after an evening of running around. Lily, the quietest of the group, fiddled with her vampire cape. "We should at least check it out," she murmured. "Everyone says they're giving out full-sized candy bars." That seemed to be all the encouragement they needed. The group of 5 continued down the street, the glow of their flashlights bouncing off the cracked sidewalk. Maple Street felt a little different that night, quieter, darker. The wind howled through the bare trees, carrying with it the scent of something sweet, like caramel apples freshly dipped. When they reached the old house, they hesitated. It looked different up close. The windows were clean now, and the yard had been cleared of the wild overgrowth that had once threatened to swallow it whole. Lights glowed from inside, casting long, flickering shadows on the porch. "Looks like they're expecting us," Amy said with a grin, her excitement overriding any fear. She bounded up the steps and rang the doorbell, the others trailing behind her. A long, low creak resonated from inside as the door slowly opened. The gang looked wide-eyed when they were greeted by the mother dressed in an extravagant wolf costume. Her smile was sweet, and her eyes twinkled behind the mask. Behind her appeared a father dressed similarly and 2 children, each dressed in a smaller, equally elaborate wolf suit. Their fangs shone in the gentle porch light. "Well, aren't you all a sight to behold?" the woman said, her voice smooth and welcoming. "Trick or treat, I assume." "Trick or treat," the kids chimed in unison, their nervousness melting away as the scent of baked goods wafted through the open door. "We've got plenty of treats inside," the woman said, stepping back and motioning them in. "Why don't you all come in for a moment? It's a little chilly out and we've made some special Halloween cupcakes." The kids exchanged glances. They weren't supposed to go into a stranger's house, but the promise of homemade treats and warmth was too tempting. Besides, the family seemed nice, nothing like the eerie rumors that had surrounded the house for years. One by one they stepped into the house, their footsteps echoing on the polished wooden floors. The inside was cozy, with flickering candles and a roaring fireplace casting a golden glow over the room. The air was filled with the delicious smell of sugar and cinnamon. "Make yourselves comfortable," the man said, closing the door behind them. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "We'll bring the treats out in just a moment." The group gathered around a large table in the center of the room. Cupcakes decorated with tiny pumpkins and bats were already laid out, along with bowls of caramel apples and candy corn. Everything looked perfect. Almost too perfect. "I told you it wasn't so bad," Amy whispered, nudging Sarah, who still looked a little uneasy. "We'll grab a few cupcakes and head out. Easy." Before Sarah could respond, the mother returned holding a tray of steaming mugs. "Hot chocolate, fresh from the stove," she said, setting them down in front of each of the kids. "Drink up and help yourselves to the cupcakes." The kids hesitated only for a moment before digging in. The cupcakes were incredible, rich, sweet, with a hint of something they couldn't quite place. The hot chocolate was warm and comforting, melting away the chill of the night. But as the warmth spread through their bodies, something else began to take hold. A strange heaviness crept into their limbs, their heads feeling foggy, as if the room was starting to spin. "Does anyone else feel weird?" Ethan asked, his voice slurred. Lily rubbed her eyes. "Maybe it's just from running around all night," she mumbled, though she too felt a growing unease. The man and woman exchanged a glance. "Don't worry, dears," the woman said softly. "It's just a little side effect of our special family recipe. You'll get used to it soon." The room seemed to tilt, and Jack's vision blurred. His eyes flickered towards the wolf masks the family wore. No, not masks. Were those real teeth? Before anyone could react, the door slammed shut with a loud bang. The trick was on them. The air inside the house had grown thick and oppressive, as if the walls themselves were closing in around them. Jack's fingers drummed nervously against the edge of the wooden table, his eyes darting between his friends, all of them looking equally uneasy. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The house, the eerie calm, and the strange family, they all seemed off. He should have trusted his gut when they were still outside. Amy was the first to notice it too. She sat straight in her chair, hands resting on the table but not touching the food. Her fairy wings fluttered slightly as she shifted uncomfortably. "Guys, maybe we should go," she said, her usually playful voice tinged with uncertainty. Amy wasn't the type to spook easily. She had always been the bold one, pushing the group into fun but risky adventures, climbing the old tree by the school, sneaking into the town's library at night just for a thrill. If she was nervous, that was a sign. "I'm feeling kind of weird," Ethan mumbled. He leaned back in his chair, blinking hard as if trying to shake off a haze. The pirate hat on his head had fallen lopsided, the parrot dangling off his shoulder by a single stitch. Normally the group's comic relief, Ethan looked anything but relaxed. His face was pale, and the usual sparkle in his eyes was gone. Sarah, seated next to him, wasn't much better. She gripped her broomstick so tightly that her knuckles were white. The witch's hat she decorated herself with little stars drooped over her forehead as she glanced warily at the family standing by the door. She was always the cautious one, the one who planned everything to the finest detail, from Halloween routes to what time they'd be home to avoid getting in trouble. Tonight, her plans seemed to be unraveling fast. "I don't like this," she whispered under her breath, but loud enough for the others to hear. Lily was the quiet one, the observer. She rarely spoke unless she had something important to say, and now her silence was more alarming than usual. She was fiddling with her vampire cape, her eyes trained on the family. Her lips were pressed into a tight line and her usual calm demeanor was slipping. She noticed things others didn't, like how the family seemed a little too eager for them to stay, or how the way they moved was unnatural, almost too fluid, like they were mimicking human behavior rather than being truly human. Lily's mind raced, but she kept her thoughts to herself, knowing from experience that blurting out her feelings wouldn't help. As for Jack, he was always the one who jumped in head first, often to his own detriment. He thrived on impulse, living for the thrill of adventure. But tonight his instincts were screaming at him that this wasn't just another thrill. Something was very, very wrong. He glanced at Amy, catching her gaze. She gave him a tiny nod, and in that instant, they both understood. They needed to leave. Now. "Maybe we should," Jack started to say, pushing himself away from the table. But before he could finish, the man in the wolf costume stepped forward, his smile growing wider, too wide, as though he were in on some private joke. "Leaving so soon?" he asked, his voice syrupy sweet. "You've barely touched your treats, and we worked so hard on them." His words were soft, but there was an underlying edge, a threat lurking beneath the surface. The mother's eyes glittered in the candlelight as she too stepped closer. "Oh, come now, you're our guests. We'd hate for you to leave without having some fun," she purred, her gaze sweeping over the group like a predator eyeing its prey. The children at her side, still wearing their unnervingly detailed wolf costumes, giggled quietly. Their laughter echoed, sending a shiver down Jack's spine. Lily's hand shot out, grabbing Jack's arm. "We need to go," she whispered, barely audible. Her grip was stronger than he expected, and it startled him. She was never this forceful, but the urgency in her voice made his pulse quicken. Amy stood, brushing her hands against her jeans as though trying to play it cool. "Yeah, thanks for the cupcakes, but we've got to hit more houses before it gets too late. You know, Halloween and all." Her voice was upbeat, but there was a sharp edge of fear beneath the surface. The woman tilted her head, her smile never faltering. "But why rush? We have plenty of time. In fact—" She trailed off, and then, in a voice that was suddenly darker, more commanding, she added, "I think you'll find leaving isn't so simple." Everyone jumped as the door to the parlor they were in, which had been wide open, crashed shut with a loud groan. Jack spun around just in time to see the heavy wooden door bolt itself. The sound echoed through the room like a lock being thrown on an old prison cell. Panic surged in Jack's chest. He turned back to the others, their faces mirroring his own growing dread. Ethan was shaking his head, blinking hard as though trying to shake off a dream. "No, no, no," he mumbled, his voice rising in fear. Sarah's face had gone ghostly pale beneath her hat. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice shaking as she clutched her broomstick like a lifeline. Lily's eyes were wide as she whispered, "This isn't right. They're not normal." Her gaze flicked toward the family, and for the first time Jack noticed it too. The way their eyes gleamed too brightly in the dim light, the sharpness of their smiles, and the way their skin seemed to shimmer ever so slightly, as if something else was lurking just beneath the surface. Amy's bold facade was cracking. She took a step back, her wings brushing against the wall. "We need to go. Now." The man's laughter filled the room, deep and guttural. "Oh, you'll go," he said, his voice low and growling. "But not before you've had your fill." At that, the transformation began. The family, formerly so adorable in their wolf costumes, began to change. The costumes appeared to melt away, revealing their true forms: thick fur, yellowed claws, and eyes that blazed like fires. Their faces contorted into snarls, and sharp fangs were bared in a menacing, predatory manner. The children, no longer giggling, let out low growls as they circled the table, their movements slow and deliberate. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he grabbed the nearest object, a chair, useless as it was, and held it up like a shield. His voice came out in a hoarse whisper. "We've got to find a way out." The room seemed to pulse around them, the walls closing in, and Jack realized with a sickening twist of his stomach that they weren't dealing with ordinary people. They weren't even dealing with ordinary wolves. They were trapped in a house with something considerably more dangerous: real-life, ravenous werewolves waiting to claim their next victims. The air was thick with the scent of fear. Jack's heart pounded so loudly in his chest that he was sure the werewolves could hear it. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. The family they'd just been sitting with, the ones who had served them cupcakes and hot chocolate, had transformed into something straight out of a nightmare. The father, who had seemed so warm and inviting just minutes ago, now loomed over them, his fur-covered arms thick with muscle, his eyes glowing a sickly yellow. The mother's once sweet smile had twisted into a snarl, sharp teeth bared, her fingers now tipped with long claws. And the children, no longer laughing innocently, were circling the table, growling, their small bodies hunched over as if preparing to pounce. "We need to move," Jack whispered, his grip tightening around the wooden chair he'd picked up in a desperate attempt to defend himself. It was a feeble weapon, but it was all he had. Amy, who had always been the bold one, stood frozen for a moment, her face pale as the realization set in. But she wasn't one to back down easily. "We have to get out of here," she said, her voice shaking but firm. Her hands clenched into fists as she looked around for an escape route. Lily's eyes darted from the werewolves to the windows. "The door's locked, but maybe—" she started, her voice low, before she cut herself off, her gaze flicking toward the back of the house. There might be another way out through the kitchen. Sarah clutched her broomstick so tightly her knuckles turned white. She had always been the planner, but there was no time for careful thinking now. Panic was setting in fast, and it was clouding her usually sharp mind. "How do we fight them?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "We don't," Jack said through gritted teeth. "We run." Ethan, who had always been the joker of the group, stood paralyzed in shock, his usual grin wiped clean from his face. "This isn't real," he mumbled, shaking his head. "This can't be real." The father werewolf let out a low, rumbling growl. His voice, though deeper and more guttural now, still held that same eerie calm. "Oh, it's very real," he said, his lips pulling back into a terrifying smile. "And you're all staying for dinner." The mother licked her lips, her glowing eyes fixated on the group like a predator watching its prey. "We don't get many visitors, you know," she said, her voice silky, but now there was a sinister edge to it. "It's been so long since we've had fresh guests." The children began closing in, their growls deepening, their sharp little teeth flashing in the flickering candlelight. One of them, the smallest, let out a giggle, a disturbingly human sound, and pounced toward Amy. "Move!" Jack shouted, springing into action. He swung the chair in a wide arc, barely managing to block the child werewolf from reaching her. The creature snarled, its claws scraping against the chair, but it was thrown back by the force of the swing. That was enough to snap everyone out of their stupor. "Run!" Amy yelled, grabbing Ethan by the arm and pulling him toward the kitchen. The others followed suit, sprinting through the narrow hallway that led to the back of the house. Their footsteps echoed through the house as they scrambled, the sounds of growling and scraping claws close behind them. The kitchen was dimly lit, but Jack immediately spotted the back door, a heavy wooden door with a small, fogged-up window. He rushed toward it, yanking at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "It's locked!" he cried, panic surging through him. His hands fumbled at the latch, trying desperately to force it open. "Break it!" Amy shouted, grabbing one of the chairs from the kitchen table. She raised it high above her head and brought it crashing down against the door. The sound of splintering wood filled the room, but the door held fast. The werewolves were getting closer. Jack could hear their growls growing louder, the sound of their claws scraping against the floor. They had mere seconds before the beasts reached them. Sarah rushed to the cabinets, her eyes scanning for something, anything they could use as a weapon. She yanked open a drawer, her hands shaking, and pulled out a large kitchen knife. "Here!" she shouted, tossing it to Jack. Jack caught the knife, his hand trembling as he gripped the handle tightly. "I'll hold them off," he said, stepping in front of the others. "You guys figure out how to get that door open." Amy and Ethan continued to bash the door with the chair, while Lily ran to the window above the kitchen sink. She tried to pry it open, but it was jammed. "It's stuck!" she cried, her voice tinged with desperation. The growling was louder now, so close that Jack could almost feel the hot breath of the wolves on the back of his neck. He turned just in time to see the father werewolf burst into the kitchen, his hulking frame filling the doorway. His eyes gleamed with hunger and his mouth twisted into a vicious grin. "You can't run forever," the father growled, his voice thick with menace. "This is our house. There's no escape." Jack's heart raced, adrenaline surging through him. He raised the knife, knowing full well that it wouldn't be enough to stop the massive creature. But he had to try. "Stay back," he warned, his voice shaking. The werewolf took a step forward, unfazed by the threat. His claws flexed, sharp and deadly, as he prepared to strike. But before he could lunge, there was a deafening crash. Amy and Ethan had finally managed to break the door down, splintering it just enough for them to squeeze through. "Come on," Amy yelled, pulling Sarah through the narrow gap. "We've got a way out." Lily was already darting through the opening, her eyes wide with fear. Jack backed toward the door, keeping the knife raised between himself and the werewolf. The creature snarled, frustrated by the barrier of the kitchen counter between them. With a final, desperate glance at the werewolf, Jack bolted for the door. He ducked through the opening just as the father let out an enraged roar, slashing at the doorway as they escaped into the cool night air. Outside, the night seemed much darker than before, as if the house had consumed what little light there was. The five of them dashed across the overgrown property, their feet pounding on the soil as the wind blew through the trees. Behind them, the house stood large and intimidating, with growling and screaming coming from within. They didn't stop running until they were halfway down the street, their hearts racing, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. "We made it," Ethan panted, doubling over with his hands on his knees. But Jack knew better. As he looked back at the house, its windows glowing faintly in the darkness, he realized the truth. "We're not safe yet," he said, his voice grim. "They'll come for us. And next time, we won't be so lucky." The night air was sharp and biting, but the chill did little to numb the fear coursing through the group as they ran through the narrow streets of Ash Hollow. Jack led the way, his mind racing with adrenaline as the others struggled to keep up. The once familiar town felt foreign, the darkness pressing in on them from every direction. "We need to keep moving," Jack said, his voice hoarse from the run. "We can't stop here." "We can't keep running forever," Sarah gasped, clutching the broomstick she had stubbornly kept with her. "Where do we even go?" Amy, breathless but ever defiant, chimed in. "Anywhere but here. We just need to put distance between us and whatever those things were." Lily, who had been unnervingly quiet since their escape, glanced back at the house, barely visible now through the foggy night. Her eyes were wide, her mind still grappling with the terrifying reality they had just faced. They weren't just people in costumes, they were werewolves, Jack finished for her, his voice heavy with grim acceptance. Ethan, who had fallen behind, caught up and immediately doubled over, hands on his knees as he tried to catch his breath. This can't be real," he muttered, his eyes still wide with disbelief. "Werewolves? That's not possible, right? That's just stories." "Not anymore," Lily said quietly. "They're real. And they're hunting us." The realization hit the group hard. The cold, dark streets of their sleepy town were no longer a refuge, but a labyrinth they couldn't seem to escape. The air was thick with dread, and as they gathered near an old lamppost flickering weakly, it felt as though something unseen was watching them from the shadows. "They'll come after us," Jack said, his eyes scanning their surroundings. "We need to be smart about this. If they can lock their own house, who knows what else they can do." Amy paced in circles, running a hand through her short hair. "But why?" she asked. "Why are they here? How long have they been in that house?" Lily's forehead furrowed as her thoughts returned to something she'd heard earlier. "I don't think they've been there very long," she answered, appearing puzzled. "I overheard my mom chatting to Mrs. Wilkins the other day about new people moving into town. She stated that they came from someplace in Europe. I believe this is a community in the countryside." Jack's eyes narrowed. Why would a family of werewolves move here? A quiet, forgotten town in the middle of nowhere? Lily hesitated for a moment before speaking again, her voice hushed. Because they were probably driven out. The others turned to her, surprised by the certainty in her tone. What do you mean? Sarah asked. Lily glanced around as though the werewolves might be lurking in the shadows listening. I think they've done this before, she whispered. Back in Europe. That's why they're here, hiding. It's possible they've been hunted by people who figured out what they were. The others stared at her, processing the weight of her words. You think they've been killing people back in Europe? Amy asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lily nodded, her eyes dark. It makes sense. They don't just survive on cupcakes and Halloween candy, do they? Lily finished her explanation. Her voice was soft but steady. The others were silent, taking in the weight of the story. That's why they're here, she said finally. They've been running for years, hiding from people who know what they are. They've been killing to survive. And now, we're next. Ethan's face had gone pale, the usual color drained completely. But why now? Why us? Sarah gripped her broomstick tighter as if it could protect her. It's Halloween, she whispered. It's the perfect night for them to hunt. They can get away with it. No one would question it if a few kids went missing. A heavy silence fell over the group. The realization was chilling. They were in way over their heads. This wasn't just some spooky Halloween story. They were being hunted, and there was no way of knowing how far the wolves would go to keep their secret hidden. They'll come after us, Jack said, his voice firm, and we need to be ready. But how? Amy asked, her voice cracking slightly. How do you fight something like that? Jack looked back at the house, the dark outline of the roof barely visible against the night sky. He felt a sickening knot in his stomach, knowing that running wasn't enough. They had to find a way to stop the wolves before it was too late. I don't know yet, he admitted, his mind racing. But we're going to figure it out. We're not going to let them win. The group huddled together under the flickering street lamp, their breath visible in the cool autumn air. The night was growing darker, and with each passing moment, the silence around them felt more oppressive. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the distant, faint howls of the wolves back at the house. They didn't have much time. Jack wiped the sweat from his brow, trying to think clearly despite the adrenaline still coursing through him. His thoughts were racing. What could they do? They were just kids, and those things back at the house weren't ordinary people. They were monsters. Werewolves. No one had ever told him how to fight something like that. We can't just keep running, Sarah said, her voice shaky but determined. They'll find us no matter where we go. But what else are we supposed to do? Ethan asked, his face pale in the dim light. We don't have any weapons, and even if we did, I'm not sure a kitchen knife is going to cut it. Literally. Amy had been pacing back and forth, her fairy wings bouncing slightly as she moved. Her usual bravado was starting to crack, but she wasn't ready to give in to fear just yet. We need a plan, she said firmly, though the tension in her voice was obvious. We need to figure out their weaknesses. They're werewolves, Jack said, running a hand through his hair. Silver, right? That's what all the stories say. But where the hell are we supposed to find Silver in Ash Hollow? Lily, who had been unusually quiet, looked up suddenly. Wait, she said, her voice soft but urgent. The old cemetery. The crypt. Everyone turned to her, confused. There's an old crypt in the cemetery near the church, Lily explained. I've been there with my parents. They're into local history, and they've taken me to see it. The crypt belonged to some old rich family, and there's a rumor that it's filled with old relics. Silver relics. Amy's eyes widened with hope. Silver relics? Like what, silver crosses and stuff? Maybe, Lily replied, nodding. There's a lot of old stuff in there. If we can get inside, maybe we can find something we can use." Wait, Ethan interrupted, waving his hands. "You're saying we break into a creepy old crypt at night to find silver relics to fight actual werewolves? Have we officially lost it?" "It's not like we have a lot of options, Ethan," Sarah snapped, her voice tight with frustration. "Do you want to go back to the house and try asking them nicely to let us go?" Ethan bit his lip and fell silent. He knew she was right. They all knew she was right. They couldn't run forever. And if they didn't do something soon, the wolves would find them. They needed to fight back. "Okay," Jack said, standing up straighter. "Lily's right. The crypt might be our only chance. We'll head there and see if we can find anything we can use against them." "How do we even know silver will work?" Amy asked, folding her arms. "We don't," Jack admitted. "But we don't have anything else. And I'm not just going to sit here and wait for them to come after us. We need to do something." Amy sighed but nodded. "All right, the crypt it is." The group set off toward the cemetery, which was on the outskirts of town, not far from the old church that had been standing since Ash Hollow was first founded. The streets were eerily quiet, and every sound, every rustle of leaves felt like it was being amplified in the darkness. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The wolves had let them escape for now, but he knew they wouldn't give up that easily. As they approached the cemetery gates, Jack could see the silhouette of the old church looming against the night sky, its steeple casting a long shadow over the graveyard. The gates were rusted and creaked loudly as they pushed them open, the sound echoing through the still night. The cemetery was overgrown, the headstones worn and cracked from years of neglect. Weeds sprouted between the gravestones, and the branches of old trees swayed gently in the wind. Somewhere deep within the graveyard was the crypt they were looking for, the key to their survival, if it even existed. "I think it's this way," Lily said quietly, pointing toward a path leading deeper into the cemetery. They followed her through the narrow path, their flashlights barely cutting through the thick fog that had started to roll in. Jack's stomach churned with nerves, his heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't afraid of graveyards normally, but tonight, everything felt different. The air felt heavy, charged with something dark and dangerous. Finally, they reached the crypt. It was a squat stone structure, half covered in ivy and moss. The door was made of thick weathered wood, and an old iron cross was nailed to the front. It looked as though no one had set foot inside it in years. "This is it," Lily said, stepping forward. She tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "It's locked." "Of course it is," Ethan muttered. "Move aside," Amy said, stepping up to the door with determination. She pulled a metal hairpin from her pocket, bending it slightly as she worked it into the lock. The others watched in awe as she fiddled with it, her face scrunched in concentration. "You can pick locks?" Sarah asked, her voice incredulously. Amy shrugged without looking up. "My brother showed me. He used to lock me out of my room and I had to get in somehow." With a soft click, the door creaked open. Amy grinned triumphantly. "Piece of cake." Jack's light lit the crypt's gloomy interior, exposing a small room packed with dusty treasures. Ornate candelabra, crosses, and chalices appeared to be made of silver, with slight gleams in the light. The walls were lined with stone shelves that had previously held coffins, but many had crumbled with age. Jack's illumination shone through the crypt's darkness, revealing a small room packed with dusty treasures. Ornate candelabra, crosses, and chalices appeared to be made of silver, with their surfaces shining slightly in the light. The walls were lined with stone shelves where coffins had previously sat, but many had crumbled with time. "This is it," Jack whispered, stepping inside. The others followed, fanning out to examine the relics. Sarah picked up a large silver cross, her hands trembling slightly. "Do you think this will actually work?" "It's silver," Jack said, grabbing an old chalice that looked like it had been forged centuries ago. "It's the only chance we've got." Amy grabbed one of the candlesticks, holding it up like a club. "Well, I've never fought a werewolf before, but if one of them gets close to me, I'm going for the head." The tension in the room was broken briefly by Ethan's nervous chuckle. "Yeah, let's see if your candlestick can take down a werewolf. Who knows, maybe we'll start a new trend." Lily picked up a small silver dagger, turning it over in her hands. "I don't know how much these will help," she said quietly, "but we have to try." Jack picked up another dagger, as the carving knife he had wasn't silver. The group gathered their makeshift weapons, their expressions hardening with resolve. They didn't know if silver would be enough to stop the werewolves, but they were ready to fight. They weren't going to just sit back and wait to be hunted. As they left the crypt, a howl echoed through the cemetery, sending a chill down Jack's spine. The wolves were on the move. "They're coming," Lily whispered, her grip tightening on the dagger. Jack's eyes narrowed and he turned to the others, his voice calm but firm. "Let's end this." The crypt door groaned as it swung shut behind them, the metallic clink of the old lock echoing ominously in the quiet night. Jack led the group out into the cemetery, their makeshift silver weapons clutched tightly in their hands. The fog was thicker now, swirling around their legs as if trying to pull them deeper into the shadows of the old gravestones. "Stay close," Jack whispered, though his voice carried the weight of a command. His eyes scanned the cemetery for any sign of movement. The werewolves could be anywhere by now, watching them from the darkness. He could feel it, the primal instinct that something dangerous was near. Amy was by his side, gripping the silver candlestick like a club. Her face was set in a determined scowl, her confidence not completely shattered despite the terror of the night. She wasn't one to let fear get the best of her. Not now. Not when they had a chance to fight back. "If they want a fight, they'll get one," she muttered under her breath. Ethan was struggling to keep calm, his hands trembling as he held the silver cross he had picked up. He had never been one for violence, always cracking jokes to diffuse tension. But tonight, the weight of the cross in his hands felt real, like this was the only thing standing between him and a gruesome death. "Do you think this stuff will really work?" he asked, his voice wavering slightly. "I mean, silver, werewolves. This is all supposed to be fantasy, right?" "It doesn't matter," Sarah said, her grip tight on the silver chalice she had chosen, her knuckles white with fear. "It has to work." Lily was quieter than usual, her eyes darting between the tombstones, listening to the wind. She could sense the presence of the wolves in the same way animals sense predators, an instinctual, gut-wrenching awareness that danger was close. Her small silver dagger glinted faintly in her hand, but she held it like it was part of her. "They're out there," she whispered, waiting for the right moment. Jack nodded grimly. "Then we won't give them the chance. We keep moving. Stick together." They made their way through the cemetery, the air heavy with the weight of anticipation. Each footstep felt loud, every crunch of leaves underfoot a signal that they were alive, that they were prey on the wolves' hunting ground. The church loomed in the distance, its tall steeple like a beacon of false hope in the dark night. Jack couldn't help but wonder if the wolves had ever feared anything like they feared this silver. The howl came first, a long, low sound that sent a chill down their spines. It echoed through the cemetery, bouncing off the ancient gravestones and carrying with it a warning. "We're coming." "Stay sharp," Jack whispered, holding the knife in front of him. His heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. Panic wouldn't save them. Only focus. Amy swung her candlestick experimentally, testing its weight. "I'm ready," she said, her voice hard. But Jack could see the tension in her shoulders and the way her eyes darted nervously to the edges of the fog. Even she wasn't sure she was ready. Ethan glanced around wildly, his voice trembling. "What if they don't attack us head on? What if they surround us or something?" "They'll want to toy with us first," Sarah said, her voice grim. "It's a game to them." "And we're the prize," Lily added quietly. As if called by their words, the fog appeared to shift. From the corner of his eye, Jack noticed movement. Dark forms fluttering between the gravestones. The wolves were closing in on them, just as Ethan had anticipated. He tightened his grasp on the knife, swallowing his growing panic. "They're here," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Then the growling started, low and guttural, coming from all around them. It was a sound that seemed to vibrate through the air, primal and threatening. Jack could feel the hair on the back of his neck stand on end as the wolves revealed themselves, stepping out of the shadows and into the dim moonlight. There were 3 of them: the father, the mother, and one of the children. In the pale light, their fur looked almost black, their yellow eyes glowing with hunger and amusement. They weren't just animals, they were intelligent, cunning predators who knew exactly what they were doing. The father werewolf let out a low growl, baring his sharp teeth in a grin that was all too human. "Did you really think you could escape us?" he rumbled, his voice rough and menacing. "This is our town now. You're just passing through." The mother werewolf circled slowly, her eyes gleaming with dark pleasure. "You children should have stayed away. But you couldn't resist, could you? Humans are always so curious." Amy stepped forward, her voice defiant. "Yeah, well, we're not just humans. We're survivors." The mother's laugh was a deep, throaty sound that sent chills through the group. "Survivors? Oh, my dear. You have no idea what real survival looks like." The wolves began to move in closer, their eyes fixed on the group, their claws scraping against the ground. Jack's heart was pounding in his chest. They had to make a move soon. They couldn't just stand here and let the wolves surround them. "We can take them," Jack whispered to the others. "Stick together. Don't let them separate us." Amy raised the candlestick, her eyes narrowing. "Let's make this count." Suddenly, the father werewolf lunged, faster than Jack could have imagined. The massive creature was on them in an instant, his claws slashing through the air toward Jack. But Jack was ready. He ducked, swinging the dagger in a wide arc. The blade caught the werewolf's arm, and a loud hiss filled the air as the blade burned across the beast's forearm. The father howled in pain, recoiling, his eyes flashing with rage. The mother growled, her teeth bared in fury as she lunged toward Amy. But Amy was quick on her feet, swinging the candlestick with all her strength. The silver connected with the werewolf's side, and she let out a shriek of pain, staggering backward. Ethan, shaking but determined, held the silver cross in front of him like a shield as the child werewolf circled him, growling. "Stay back!" he yelled, his voice trembling. The wolf snarled, its eyes locked on him, but it hesitated. The silver, even in the form of a simple cross, seemed to give it pause. Sarah swung the silver chalice toward the mother werewolf. Her movements were panic-stricken, but precise. "We need to get out of here," she screamed. "They're not going to let us leave alive," Lily shouted, slashing at the father with her dagger as he tried to circle them again. Her movements were fast and controlled, but Jack could see the terror in her eyes. The wolves were faster than they had anticipated, but the silver was working. It was keeping them at bay, even if only for a moment. Jack knew they couldn't keep this up for long. The wolves were too strong, too coordinated. They had to find a way to end this, and fast. "They're hurt, but not for long," Jack yelled. "We need to finish them." The wolves, now circling cautiously, growled, their yellow eyes filled with fury. Blood dripped from the father's arm where Jack had slashed him, but it wasn't enough. They needed to take these monsters down. Amy nodded, her face set with determination. "Let's give them a fight they won't forget." The werewolves circled like predators, closing in on their prey. The previously protected walls of Ash Hollow's cemetery now felt like a trap. The fog appeared to grow, sticking to the ground and curling around the tombstones, making it difficult to see the creatures properly. Jack wiped the sweat from his brow and held the silver knife tightly in his fingers. The wound he had inflicted on the father werewolf was shallow, and he knew it would be insufficient to stop him. "We have to finish this now," Jack growled, his voice barely above a whisper. He could see the fear in his friend's eyes, but also the determination. None of them wanted to die here, not in this dark, forgotten graveyard. The father werewolf snarled again, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. The wound on his arm hissed and steamed where the silver had burned him, but the pain seemed to fuel his rage. "You think a few trinkets can stop us?" he growled, his voice deeper, more bestial than before. "You don't know what you're up against." "We've handled worse than you," Amy shot back, though her voice was strained. The silver candlestick she wielded was heavy, but she held it steady, ready to swing at the first sign of an attack. The mother werewolf, her lips pulled back in a snarl, moved gracefully to the side, her glowing yellow eyes never leaving the group. She was waiting, watching, and calculating. "You should have stayed away from us," she hissed, her voice dripping with menace. "Now we'll have to kill you. Slowly." Ethan took a shaky step backward, gripping the silver cross like his life depended on it. His voice trembled as he spoke. "They're just messing with us. They could have attacked by now, but they're waiting for something. What are they waiting for?" Lily's eyes flickered with a sudden realization. "They're waiting for the moon to fully rise," she said quietly. "That's when they'll be at their strongest." A sickening dread settled over the group as they glanced toward the sky. The full moon was still partially obscured by clouds, but it was rising fast. The wolves were playing with them, stalling for time, knowing they would grow stronger under the full moon's light. "We can't let them transform fully," Jack said, his voice firm. "We need to take them down before that happens." But even as he said it, doubt crept into his mind. They were just kids, armed with nothing but old silver relics and raw fear. How could they hope to fight monsters like these? "We have to split up," Jack said suddenly, the idea forming in his mind. "If we stay in one place, they'll pick us off. But if we spread out, we'll have a better chance of confusing them." Amy's eyes widened. "Are you crazy? That's how we die in horror movies." Jack shook his head. "It's our best shot. We can't beat them all together. They're too fast, too strong. But if we split up, they'll have to chase us, and we can use that against them." Sarah felt her nerves taking over, fear making her voice tight. "And what do we do once we split up? Run until we get picked off one by one?" "No," Jack said. "We split up and flank them. Keep moving, but don't stray too far from each other. We draw them out, we make them expose themselves, and then we attack when they're vulnerable. We've already hurt them once. We can do it again." There was a heavy pause as the others considered the plan. The werewolves watched them with predatory patience, their growls low and continuous. "I'm in," Amy said, her voice firm. "I'm not going down without a fight." Ethan looked at Jack, his fear evident, but he nodded. Okay, let's do it. But if we die, I'm haunting you." Sarah hesitated, gripping her silver chalice. "Fine," she said softly, her voice shaking, "but we'd better make this count." Lily looked at Jack, her eyes calm despite the chaos. "Let's move before they realize what we're doing." With the plan set, they scattered into the fog, moving quickly between the gravestones. Jack sprinted to the left, ducking behind a tall statue of an angel, its stone wings looming over him. His heart hammered in his chest as he crouched low, watching for movement. The father werewolf let out a furious howl, realizing what they were doing. He turned sharply, his glowing eyes scanning the graveyard. "You can't hide from us," he bellowed. His voice echoed through the night as he sniffed the air, tracking them. Jack pressed his back against the cold stone of the statue, holding his breath as the werewolf prowled closer. He could hear the beast's heavy breathing and the sound of its claws scraping the earth. His hand tightened around the silver dagger. He had one shot at this. Across the cemetery, Amy crouched behind a crumbling tombstone, her muscles tensed like a coiled spring. She could see the mother werewolf stalking toward her, the beast's fur bristling, its teeth gleaming in the moonlight. Amy's breath hitched as she realized just how massive the creature was up close. Its hulking form was more terrifying than anything she had ever imagined. "Come on," she whispered to herself, her grip tightening on the candlestick. Just a little closer. Ethan, who had hidden behind an ancient mausoleum, looked around the corner, his heart racing in his chest. The little werewolf, the smallest of the family, was moving toward him, its head low to the earth and its yellow eyes gleaming with hunger. Ethan slowed his breathing, his throat dry, but he pushed himself to remain still, waiting for the appropriate moment. Sarah had positioned herself behind a large oak tree, her hands shaking as she held the chalice like a weapon. The father werewolf was moving in her direction now, its heavy footsteps sending vibrations through the earth. She could hear the growls deep in its throat, the hunger in its breath. And then, without warning, the father werewolf lunged. Jack noticed the movement from the corner of his eye. The beast charged at Sarah, its gigantic body breaking through the gravestones like a battering ram. Jack's instincts kicked in. He couldn't let the werewolf get to her. "Now!" Jack shouted, springing from his hiding place. The others moved in unison, attacking from all sides. Amy swung her silver candlestick with all her might, smashing it into the mother werewolf's side. The beast howled in pain, staggering back as the silver burned her flesh. Ethan thrust the silver cross forward as the child werewolf lunged at him, the creature recoiling as the cross touched its fur. The beast snarled and snapped its jaws, but Ethan held his ground, forcing it back. Jack rushed at the father werewolf, the blade flashing in his hand. He aimed for the creature's exposed side, slashing at it with everything he had. The werewolf howled in agony, its yellow eyes flashing with rage as the silver burned deep into its flesh. For a moment it seemed like they were winning. The wolves were retreating, wounded by the silver, their snarls filled with pain and fury. But then the clouds parted, and the full moon shone down on them, bathing the cemetery in an eerie silver light. The transformation began. The werewolves' bodies convulsed as the power of the full moon surged through them. Their fur bristled, their muscles swelled, and their claws grew longer, sharper. Their wounds, once agonizing, began to heal before the kids' eyes. "Oh no," Amy whispered, her voice filled with dread. Jack's heart sank as he watched the werewolves regenerate, their eyes glowing brighter, their strength returning. "We're out of time," Jack muttered. "We have to finish them now, or we're dead." The wolves, now fully transformed and stronger than ever, let out a chorus of howls that filled the night. They were done playing games, and the hunt was back on. The full moon hung high in the sky now, casting a pale, unholy light over the cemetery. The werewolves, fully transformed, were more terrifying than ever. Their hulking forms bristled with power, their glowing yellow eyes locking onto the group with a hunger that could not be mistaken. Jack's chest tightened as he watched the creatures regenerate. The silver wounds they had inflicted were already beginning to heal. The odds were shifting, and the realization hit him like a punch to the gut. They were losing. The plan had failed. The wolves were stronger, faster, and now fully powered by the light of the full moon. But they couldn't stop fighting now. If they gave up, they would be nothing but another group of victims lost to Ash Hollow's twisted secrets. "They're healing," Sarah shouted, her voice cracking with fear. She backed up toward the oak tree, the silver chalice in her hand trembling. "We can't stop them." "Don't give up," Jack yelled back, his heart pounding in his ears. He couldn't let them lose hope. Not now. "We have to keep fighting. We still have the silver. We can still hurt them." But even as he spoke, the father werewolf let out a deafening roar, his body now fully healed, his massive form towering over them. His eyes burned with fury as he stalked toward Jack, his claws glinting in the moonlight. "You should have stayed away," the werewolf growled, his voice distorted and inhuman. "But now, we're going to enjoy ripping you apart." The mother werewolf snarled, her eyes fixed on Amy, who stood her ground with the silver candlestick raised like a sword. The child werewolf, smaller but just as deadly, bared its teeth at Ethan, circling him like a predator waiting for the kill. It was clear now there would be no more playing. This was the end. But Jack refused to let fear consume him, not when his friends were counting on him. He gripped the silver knife in his hand, feeling its weight, knowing it was his only chance. His mind raced, trying to come up with a plan, something, anything, that could turn the tide in their favor. And then, as the wolves closed in, he remembered something. "The crypt," Jack whispered to himself, his eyes widening with realization. He glanced back toward the old stone crypt, barely visible through the fog and tombstones. It was filled with silver relics, more than they had taken with them. If they could lure the wolves there, if they could surround them with the silver, they might stand a chance. "Amy, Ethan," Jack called out, his voice urgent. "We need to get back to the crypt. It's our only chance." Amy's eyes flickered with understanding. "Got it!" she shouted, swinging her candlestick at the mother werewolf, forcing her back for a moment. "Everyone, head to the crypt." Ethan, still holding the silver cross in front of him like a shield, nodded frantically. Okay, let's go." "Sarah, Lily," Jack called, signaling them to move. "We can trap them." The group broke into a run, darting between the tombstones as the werewolves let out furious howls behind them. Jack's heart raced as they sprinted toward the crypt, his legs burning with the effort. The wolves were fast, too fast, but they had to make it. It was their only shot. The heavy footsteps of the werewolves pounded the earth behind them, the growls growing louder and more menacing. Jack didn't dare look back. He didn't need to. He could feel the beasts closing in, their breath hot on his neck, their claws scraping the ground. As they reached the crypt, Jack shoved open the door, his pulse racing. "Get inside," he yelled. The others hurried in, their footsteps booming through the narrow, dark area. The air within was frigid, and they could smell dust and rot, but they paid little attention. They seized any silver relics they could find. Silver crosses, candlesticks, goblets, anything that could be used as a weapon. The werewolves followed, their massive bodies filling the doorway as they snarled in rage. The father werewolf lunged first, crashing into the crypt with terrifying speed. Jack was ready. He swung the silver dagger as hard as he could, slashing across the beast's chest. The werewolf howled in pain, the silver burning his flesh, but the attack wasn't enough to stop him. The mother and child werewolves followed close behind, but this time, the group was ready. Amy swung her candlestick, connecting with the mother werewolf's head with a sickening crack. The beast staggered, dazed for a moment, but quickly regained her balance, her eyes flashing with fury. Lily and Sarah threw silver crosses at the wolves, the relics clattering to the ground around them. The silver formed a rough circle, creating a barrier between the group and the werewolves. The beasts snarled and hissed, but they hesitated, their movements cautious. "They're afraid of the silver," Lily whispered, her eyes wide with realization. "It's keeping them at bay." Jack nodded, his mind racing. "We can use this," he said, his voice firm. "We can trap them inside the crypt." "How?" Ethan asked, his voice panicked. "They're still too strong." "We don't need to beat them physically," Jack said. "We just need to keep them here long enough for the silver to weaken them." Amy's eyes lit up with understanding. "We create a perimeter," she said. "We keep them inside the crypt, surround them with silver so they can't escape." The group sprang into action, grabbing every silver relic they could find and placing them in a circle around the werewolves. The beasts howled in fury, their eyes glowing with rage, but they couldn't cross the silver. Their movements were slower now, more desperate as the power of the moon began to wane. The wolves fought back with everything they had, but they were weakening. The silver was doing its job, draining their strength and burning their skin every time they tried to break through the barrier. The father werewolf snarled, his once powerful body now trembling with pain. "You won't win," he growled, his voice barely more than a whisper. But Jack stood firm, his eyes blazing with determination. "We already have." The mother werewolf let out a final furious howl before collapsing to the ground, her body convulsing as the silver sapped her strength. The child followed soon after, its small form twitching before it too went still. The father werewolf, the last to fall, glared at Jack with hate-filled eyes. "This isn't over," he growled. "There will always be more like us." Jack stared down at the creature, his heart pounding. "Maybe," he said quietly, "but not tonight." With one last agonized snarl, the father werewolf collapsed, his body slowly shifting back into its human form as the moonlight faded. The group stood in stunned silence, the weight of what had just happened crashing down on them. The werewolves were gone, defeated. Their nightmare was finally over. Jack let out a shaky breath, lowering the dagger as he turned to his friends. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with disbelief. Amy, still holding the candlestick, grinned despite the exhaustion on her face. "Damn right we did." Ethan let out a nervous laugh, collapsing onto the crypt's cold stone floor. "We survived. I can't believe it. We actually survived." Lily and Sarah exchanged relieved glances, their faces pale but alive with triumph. For a long moment they stood there in the quiet, the silver relics glinting faintly around them and the bodies of the werewolves lying still at their feet. The moon had faded, and the cemetery was peaceful once more. The nightmare was finally over. The group slowly made their way back to the house, unaware of the danger that still lurked within. The group had forgotten about the other werewolf still back at the house. Little did they know the true terror was only just beginning. As they approached the house, a low growl echoed from within, sending shivers down their spines. The group exchanged worried glances, realizing their mistake too late. The lone werewolf, filled with rage and grief, was waiting for them, ready to unleash its fury. The air was thick with tension as they cautiously entered the house, their weapons ready. They would soon come face to face with the vengeful creature, and the true battle for survival would begin. But that is another story.